Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Go Iowa Awesome and Rivals.com. I'm your recruiting analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter. Before we get started, make sure that you subscribe, leave that rate and review. Head over to iowa.rivals.com/subscribe so you can get all the inside info from us on the Hawkeyes and recruiting. That's definitely a great place to be right now as the season has started. So today, what we're doing, we are previewing that CyHawk game this Saturday at 2:30 in Jack Trice with Bill Seals of CycloneReport at William Seals on Twitter. So Bill, before we really get into it, initial thoughts on that Cyclones victory last week, 30-9 over UNI.
Well, I guess if there were ever a game that Iowa State didn't really want to show a whole lot offensively to Iowa, it's in a game where they only run 45 offense. So I think a big part of the preseason, at least talking to Matt Campbell, was efficiency on offense, taking care of the ball. Two new quarterbacks out there. Rocco Becht got the start. J.J. Cole, a couple of 4-stars that Iowa State signed each of the past two recruiting classes. They did that. They took care of the ball. Rocco was 10 of 13 passing, seemed to be a little more comfortable, and not surprisingly, he's been in the program longer than J.J. But I think Rocco's solidified himself there through the 2 touchdown passes to the tight ends. And Iowa State didn't turn the ball over. On the other side, they forced some turnovers, turned 2 of those into 10 points. Jeremiah Cooper, the defensive player of the week in the Big 12 for those 2 picks that he got against UNI. So I think all around, and you saw special teams wise too. Iowa State actually has a special teams coordinator now in Jordan Langs. He's also handling the running back coaching duties, but we saw that was a big strength as well. And gosh, Iowa State, 2 of the top punters in the nation. And I think special teams, you look at that phase, that could be a big one this week, and what could be a low scoring and pretty close, maybe 1-score margin of victory either way.
Now, again, before we get into really the thick of the game, tell us about the issue for folks getting in after the game started, especially for those who are planning on going to the game this weekend. How should they prepare? Should they plan on getting into the stadium relatively early?
Well, I think that according to AD Jamie Pollard, after he talked a little bit after last week's issues, you probably want to be in there by about 1:45. I think if you're a Hawkeye fan watching this, Cyclone fans tuning in as well, you want to try to get in there by about 1:45. They have a new a Ticketmaster ticketing system, I guess, that last week they didn't have. I don't think they had enough scanners for the demand of the guys, the people coming up. And then also, I don't think we're going to have temperature being an issue this week. But, I mean, Eliot, when you're out in the sun and stuff, people have a hard time seeing their cell phone screens. And then if it gets to a certain temperature, the thing just shuts down. Well, good luck scanning your ticket then. But I think you want to plan on being there 45 minutes-ish before kickoff, and you should be in good shape. And I think Iowa State, after week 1, maybe some of those kinks worked out going into this week.
So now back to football, as we're talking a little bit about, you mentioned the quarterbacks, Rocco Becht and then J.J. Cole getting some snaps. Do you think we're going to see 2 quarterbacks this weekend in that CyHawk game? Do you think J.J. Cole will see the field?
Well, that's a good question, Eliot. I think this is going to be a close game, so it's probably not going to be one of those deals where you see 2 quarterbacks, a second one come in maybe in mop-up situations. And really, when you look at those 2 quarterbacks, you don't have to change the offense a lot around them. So it's not really a case where you're going to see one to come in and maybe run a couple gadget plays, because they're pretty similar in what they bring. So I would be very surprised if we see J.J. Cole this week, even though Matt Campbell yesterday at his press conference hinted that we could see him. But I'd be very surprised if he plays this week.
And so when it comes to a guy like Becht, one thing that we talked about quite a bit yesterday, Tuesday at Iowa's media availability for football, is that it's kind of difficult to prepare for a quarterback that has seen so little of the field at the college football level. And you mentioned only however many snaps, and he didn't play all of them last week against UNI. So, do you think that and you could arguably say the same thing about a decent amount of the running back group and just the rest of the offense in general with a lot of the turnover that this team has experienced. Do you think that's an advantage for Iowa State going into this one, even though there is the lesser experience and they haven't seen as much time on the football field in Ames?
Well, I guess it could be construed as a little bit of an advantage, although the head coach is still the same. The guy with what you would think would have the ultimate say maybe on what they were going to do and maybe in certain situations. Nate Shieldhouse is the new offensive coordinator. He took over as a guy that was on the field, I believe on the field during games his entire career so far, but now is up in the booth calling plays and has a lot of help from some other guys on the sidelines, Jake Waters, Kyle Kemp, a couple of those on the field. New quarterback out there in Becht, and they kept things pretty vanilla, I think, really, in that first game. Not surprisingly. I mean, Iowa's probably not going to do the same thing for Iowa State either unless it needs to. So, and the offense, we really didn't see if there were a whole lot of changes, I think, with Iowa State's system because they didn't really do a whole lot. 45 offensive plays, and I think we'll have a little bit better idea on Nate Shieldhouse's offense and maybe any differences in that coming out of this week's game and then going into Ohio.
To further that conversation on Becht, in the little bit that you've seen, obviously you covered his recruitment as well, being a 4-star. What are his strengths? What should Iowa fans be prepared for from the Cyclone quarterback and, well, the Iowa defense for that matter?
Well, I think one comparison that I'll draw is Brock Purdy. You look at him, similar stature guys. Brock probably could have been a 4-star coming out of high school with the way he finished his career down there in Arizona. And similar build. Rocco has that escapability, the ability to extend plays, and we've seen Iowa State's offensive line. I'm sure we'll maybe get to that here in a little bit, but that's new coaching there as far as a position coach goes. And with that offensive line still maybe going in flux a little bit and getting some time under Ryan Clanton, that means you like to have a quarterback with some of that escapability, like what Rocco had, like what we saw with Brock. He wasn't always playing behind the best offensive lines in Ames either. So I think the ability of Rocco to get out and make plays and see the field as well as he's done is pretty big for Iowa State. And a lot of comparisons, I think, to Brock and what we saw and early in his career.
Now, before we get to the offensive line, I want to talk a little bit about the Cyclones' weapons on the outside and in the backfield as well. Cartavius Norton is, when I look at the offense, he and Jalen Knoll are the two names that stand out, though the tight end room is really deep. When you're facing a defense like Iowa, it's going to be one of the best in the country, right? Where do you think, in terms of these offensive weapons, can they get that advantage? Can they find a hole in the Iowa defense based on the talent that they have and their ability to move the ball with a quarterback like Becht? And they do have that experience at the wide receiver position and in the running back room with some youth too in Abu Sama.
Yeah, and we saw against Iowa last season, Xavier Hutchinson had 11 catches, closed in on 100 yards, had that big touchdown catch, and he's not back this year. So it's going to be interesting to see how Iowa State goes about trying to attack this Iowa defense. And Jalen Knoll didn't really do much in that opener against UNI, and he's kind of that one that's going to go over the middle, work out of the slot. And we heard a lot of good things about Jaden Higgins in the preseason, and he's also one that we didn't really see a whole lot out of. And maybe that's just, I guess, the vanilla-ness, if that's a word, of Iowa State's offense in that opener. And we didn't Higgins caught that one pass for 15 yards, and Dimitri Stanley had some drops in that game. He was the number 3 guy last season, number 2 returning guys. So I almost wonder if the tight end group is going to be a focus for Iowa State in this game. We've seen Ben Bramer out of Nebraska. He had a tremendous debut for Iowa State, and I almost wonder if Iowa State's going to lean on some of those tight ends a little bit, and Bramer, and we've also seen Gabe Burkle, someone up from the Cedar Rapids area. He got involved in the passing game, and he's that big blocking tight end Iowa State liked to have in the past, and Dylan Sainer. So it's going to be interesting to see through the air how they go, but I think tight ends are going to be involved, and you've got Abu Sama at running back, Cartavius Norton, two of those backs that led the way last week. And I think those two are going to complement each other pretty well. And we saw that last week.
Did I see on I don't know if it's the same for this week's depth chart, but did I see on the depth chart from last week that they had four oars? Right. Yeah.
You figured they had 5 guys on the oar line. I just saw a tweet out somewhere that somebody had the breakdown of all the oars in the depth charts of college football teams. And Iowa State actually was, I don't know, maybe middle of the pack. I was kind of surprised because you never can really glean too much from a Matt Campbell depth chart, and notably at the running back position last week. And then you still got, I think Rocco and JJ are still on the oar line this week at quarterback, even though we know how that's going to go. So I think after week 1, Matt just maybe has his secretary just say, yeah, looks good, and that's a depth chart for that week. So, I mean, there's a guy that's out for the year on the offensive line that's listed on the oar line there at guard. So, you never can take too much out of that.
So when we're talking about that running back group, is it going to be a group that's considered to be that deep, or are we going to see mostly Norton and Sama throughout the year, do you think?
Well, I think that's what you're going to see. Eli Sanders was another one of those backs that had a great camp, and everybody thought maybe he would push Norton for the starting job last week. And I guess he's nicked up a little bit too. And it's kind of a shame because he was really starting to kind of come into his own. He was a 4-star that they signed out of the 2021 class out of Arizona that really has just not gotten his footing in Ames. And you wonder now if Sama is going to kind of take over that role, because Sanders is the fleet-footed back, the home run threat. Now Abu is that, and Norton's kind of the guy, the run between the tackles guy to get the tough yards.
So mention of the offensive line, that's been kind of a weak spot in Ames. That's the reason they brought in Coach Clanton, who had such a great career at UNI. Is it a weak spot again this year? I guess is the main question.
Well, they didn't grade out very well last week. 45 offensive plays. You wonder through as many guys there if they stuck with the same 5. Maybe if it's a little bit different result, I think you'd want to see better out of that group. I believe only one of those guys graded out above a 50 against UNI, and it makes you wonder against a defense like Iowa's how that's going to look. And when that's not performing well, you've seen these Iowa State offenses struggle in recent years. But Ryan Clanton was brought in for a reason. He's got one game now under his belt to look at the film, and we saw 2 new starters there, a redshirt freshman and a former JUCO transfer, those 2 new starters. So it'll be interesting to see what's cleaned up there, and maybe if they can grade a little bit better against the Hawks.
Now, for Iowa, the offensive line group did pretty well in pass pro. Run blocking was a weak spot. Is there a dichotomy when it comes to that dichotomy, rather? Is there a strength versus a weakness, or is it pretty much about the same level for Iowa State?
Well, I think pressure-wise, I really wondered how much pressure Iowa State could get on Theo Day last week with just so many new faces. Will McDonald gone to the NFL, MJ Anderson moved on. Those were 2 stalwarts last year. And I was pleasantly surprised. Tyler Onyedem is going to be a handful for Iowa this week, coming out of that kind of that defensive tackle that lines up in the end, the 3-3-5 look that they they have between he and Dominic Orange. They had solid first games against UNI. We saw believe it was the very opening play of the game when Dom Orange came through there and hit Theo. They picked up the flag, and then Iowa State gets flagged in the secondary for a penalty there. So, but between Onyedem and Orange, those are going to be two guys that Iowa definitely has to account for. And then you've just got a lot of youth there. Joey Peterson, one that is playing at that rush end spot that Will left, the Leo linebacker / defensive end position. Ike Ezeagu is a redshirt freshman that got a lot of time last week at that rush end position as well. So I think Iowa State, great in the secondary. But if a quarterback, because Iowa State can't get a lot of pressure there, it could stress that secondary a little bit, which is, I believe, is maybe the best that Matt Campbell's had in his tenure at Iowa State.
Now, that 3-3-5 is traditionally considered to be a defense that is focused on the pass game. And for Iowa, I mentioned their struggles in run blocking, 36 attempts for 88 yards last week. Is that something that you look at as somebody who covers Iowa State, where it's like, well, that's good. That's good to know.
Yeah. Well,
what do you think?
It's definitely not a defense that was designed to beat Iowa. It was designed as a defense to match up against the 9 Big 12 teams on the schedule and the offenses that they ran. And we saw that. I mean, how long did it take Iowa State to beat Iowa? I mean, with that defense that they run, Iowa State, Iowa, that beat them over the middle how many times, like with the tight ends and the crossing routes and all that. And there's a way to beat this defense. Iowa has done a pretty good job with that. And maybe Iowa State, after all of these years, maybe a few more wrinkles coming into Saturday's game. But certainly, if you look at Iowa's offensive numbers, as you mentioned, the running game struggled to get going, and it'll make you think how that fares against Iowa State with a defensive front that really is pretty green, really, as far as experience goes. And a lot of these guys are playing in this CyHawk game for the first time. So we'll see how it plays out.
A lot of those guys playing in this game for the first time, there's one freshman starting at middle linebacker for Iowa State. Right. Am I correct?
Chicagoland guy, Jack Sadowski. I don't think Iowa recruited him real heavily. He was one that Iowa State got committed pretty early and then really shut it down. You didn't really hear. He kept a pretty low profile, even with us recruiting reporters as well. So he got to work his senior year. You really didn't hear from him much again, but since he got to Ames in January, has made his presence known. Surprisingly didn't record a tackle in that game against UNI, and he's a middle linebacker. And you look at Iowa State's defensive linemen, and they don't really rack up a whole lot of numbers either, especially the guys on the inside. It's all funneled to the linebackers. So we didn't really see a whole lot out of Sadowski. Someone else in there, Zach Labette, a kid out of Florida that they got as a transfer from Missouri. He's going to split time, I think, with Sadowski. Those guys, maybe, maybe like a 60-40 type of percent split there. So just one of them, though, a couple of redshirt freshmen at the Sam linebacker at the outside spot there. So some more new faces. And then you've got Gary Vaughn, the kid who's back taking a free COVID year that's kind of on the other end of the spectrum.
And now let's move on to the known strength for Iowa State, which is that secondary. And I'm looking at TJ Tampa, which is a name that a lot of folks know. Is Jeremiah Cooper that won that Big 12? There you go. And it just seems like they go for a position that is, they have 5 guys on the field at a time. They look like they go 7, 8, 9 deep.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned 7, 8, 9 deep. I think they played 9 linebackers before we move on to talk about the secondary. So they played I believe, around 70 guys in that UNI game combined when you factor offense, defense, and special teams. So the participation chart was like their entire roster. It was just amazing. But yeah, as far as we didn't see a whole lot of TJ Tampa against UNI. Miles Purchase on the other side played quite a bit. I believe Tampa only had maybe 23 snaps in that game. I think they felt that they were probably in good shape defensively, and we've heard a lot about Terrell Crosby, Jontez Williams. Those are a couple of redshirt freshmen that got a lot of time with Tampa kind of taking it easy in that UNI game. We saw some good things out of them. And then safety, that's a great position there. Bo Freeler was the one who kind of dominated the headlines. He's the he's been all Big 12 a couple of times so far. He's a junior. And then you've got Jeremiah Cooper, a true sophomore, got a lot of time last season. They kind of battled some injuries, fought through those. And then Malik Verdon, we were just starting to see him last season really establish himself as one of those cornerstones at safety, and misses most of the year with an injury. But he's another one we saw his name called a lot against UNI.
Now, when I'm gonna flip back to the run defense for a second here for Iowa State. When I asked Coach Ferentz about that on Tuesday, just given the fact that Iowa, well, in that Utah State game, the thing that they referenced several times in regards to their inability to get the run game going was the fact that they didn't really know what to expect with the Utah State defense. New defensive coordinator coming in, they were showing some fronts that they didn't exactly expect. And my question was, well, Iowa State a lot better than Utah State. Mm-hmm. So obviously that, I guess, quote unquote, excuse isn't going to hold up against a team like the Cyclones. But what Kirk said was something to the effect of, well, they tend to, even though it is a 3-3-5 and a defense that does tend to focus on the passing game, they are a team that gets their guys free and they don't miss tackles. And that's why they do have a decent run defense as well. Would you agree with that sentiment? And do you think it's going to hold up on Saturday?
Well, the safeties you'll see on tape, the safeties are also very involved in the run game, and they all fly to the ball and they don't miss many tackles. And then I think that's one thing that makes TJ Tampa and Miles Purchase so good too, is how well they support the run game. And against Iowa, you're going to need those guys. Iowa State's going to need those guys to fly to the ball and not miss tackles. And that's one thing that when you run that 3-3-5, I think you're going to be tested underneath a lot. You're probably not going to get pressured deep too much or put a lot of stress, I think, down the field. So that takes guys coming up with that three-man front and supporting the run and making those tackles, and they've done that well. UNI, rushing wise, maybe as far as the defensive front for ISU goes, maybe wishes that they would have played a little bit better, I think, in the trenches against the run. But we saw some things happen there. UNI was able to sustain some drives late in that game, and the defense wasn't able to get off the field. That's why you run 45 offensive plays.
So before we get to our final predictions here, one thing that I want to make sure we hit on is that Iowa has won 5 straight in Ames. Obviously lost that one in Iowa City in a very low scoring game last year, 10-7. Is the fact that the Hawkeyes have won these 5 straight in Ames, would you say that's like an extra motivating factor for the Cyclones? Is it something that they are aware of going into Saturday?
Well, I think certainly it probably comes up in some of those pregame meetings this week, but I think the questions that Matt Campbell had that he faced yesterday was just about the ability to finally get over the hump last season and win that game. And really it was a game that, I mean, how many times have you seen Iowa State talk about winning in the margins and stuff like that? And they had a quarterback last season that threw 2 interceptions in that game. That was a problem throughout the season. Iowa State did some of those things, not winning in the margins type things, and still was able to pull out that win. So I think that was really huge for the team's psyche coming into this week. And you know that it's going to come up that they haven't won in Ames, and as you mentioned, 5 straight times.
Now, by the sounds of it, you have been impressed with the team based on this one game that you saw against a strong team in FCS UNI, a top 25 ranked team in the FCS, traditionally a very strong program. Does it carry over into your prediction? What is your prediction going into this game? Do you have a final score? Who do you think wins? Where are you at with your thoughts going into this one?
To be honest, I really don't pull a whole lot out of the UNI game. I just think that it's between week 1 and week 2. It seems like things change so much, and you've got such a step up, I think, in competition, especially on the defensive side. Iowa State was able to get a lot of pressure on Theo Day and made him look pretty pedestrian this week. Does that happen against a Cade McNamara and what we've seen in him from his time in Michigan? Certainly a step up for Iowa there. So I really don't think you can take too much really out of that UNI game, and that's why I think it's so difficult for me to break this game down. Really, I think at this point of the week, I will say I believe I don't know, is it 39 points? Is that the over-under right now? Probably going to hit the under on that, and I wouldn't surprise me if it's a sizable amount below the under. And I think it's a one-possession game. We've seen, I mean, that's probably a lazy evaluation out of me, but I'm just going off a track record here, and these games are low scoring. And how many in Matt Campbell's tenure as head coach have been one-score games? It seems like most of them. The reason we went 4-8 last season is because they didn't fare very well in those one-score games.
So do you have a final score? So I'm getting some general stuff, but do you have a specific prediction, final score for this one, Bill?
I really don't at this point. I'll get into tomorrow. I'll spend about 3 or 4 hours really digging deep into this, go into the game preview writing mode, and come up with the final score. But I would just say generally, I think this is a game that Iowa State wins, and again, maybe a 3 to 4 point margin somewhere. So I guess you could say I think they're going to hit the under on whatever the over/under is now. I think 39 or something. It's going to be a low-scoring game. Iowa State by 3 or 4 points, somewhere in there.
I saw the under this morning on Twitter, and it was 36.5.
Okay, so it's gone down. I think I put up my game score prediction thread for all of our users on CycloneReport, and I always like to give them, what the lines are. So it has gone down, and not surprisingly, I mean, when you saw 39 points, I'm sure that the under started getting hammered on that. So.
Yeah, definitely. Now, with that said, I actually, now this was probably about a month ago, we got together and did a full season prediction on our site and really went into the weeds on some of these early games too. And I actually, having seen week 1 offense from Iowa, I have definitely backed off this bit of what appears to be a hot take now, but I thought Iowa was going to blow out Iowa State, just given the fact that, well, one, there's so much new personnel, and we didn't exactly know if JJ Cole was going to play half the game or not. And playing against one of the top defenses in the country, that's a tall task for a young quarterback. And you could say the same thing for Rocco Becht. So I am now at a point where I'll probably flip it to a 3 to 4 point win for Iowa. So we'll see what happens. Of course, I'll have you send me over your final prediction article and everything like that. We'll get that in the description for the podcast, so folks can check it out, and I'll share it on our premium boards as well.
Definitely,
but
I think it's as far as Iowa State is concerned. You mentioned kind of some of your observations. I think a couple of things we could probably take out of the UNI game is that this offense was efficient. You didn't have a new first-time starting quarterback come out and throw 2 or 3 picks to kind of give you some pause there. I think that position's in good hands, and they've definitely harped on these guys about efficiency and taking care of the football. We did certainly not what you talk about the 2022 Iowa State offense with that. And then defensively, what they were able to do I think is encouraging for Iowa State fans, especially that defensive front. And what we saw of Tyler Onyedem and Dominic Orange, if they can keep those guys on the field against Iowa, this defense is as good as what we've seen in the John Haycock's run at Iowa State. And the secondary too. Gosh, that's probably better than what we saw last season. So you have that as well.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about in-state recruiting battles before we get you out of here, purely out of my own curiosity. Before we do get to that, while I've got you, now that there is a verdict on Aaron Blum and Jack Johnson, no longer on the team, on the roster on Iowa's website, Noah Shannon expected to be done, let alone, assuming that appeal doesn't exactly bring anything to fruition. Is this something that the gambling situation? So all in all, it's kind of just, we've moved on more or less in Iowa City is what it appears like. Is that the same in Iowa State? Do you feel like it's affected the team currently at all, or it's affecting the team in chemistry and if they've embraced Rocco Becht in favor of Hunter Deckers, and thoughts on the running back group with Jairell Brock out? Like, what's the thoughts there? Have they moved on as well?
Well, they appear to have moved on. I think everyone has embraced Rocco, and really since the end of spring ball, I believe that Hunter's not really been around the program. It wasn't one of those things where training camp started in August and he took off and left. He wasn't really around all summer. So I think there's been several months now for the team to kind of take hold of the new quarterbacks there, and Rocco as being the guy. And a lot of it's really, I think, been resolved. And I think you probably have 6 games, I think, for Jake Remsburg. They're probably going to get him back, I believe, the 21st of October, and then they've got a bye week the next week. So wouldn't be surprised to see Remsburg probably end up being more like 8 weeks with the 7 games and then the bye week, and they bring him back. And that's going to be a nice addition, I think, at tackle if this offensive line struggles. And we've seen them deal with some injuries as well. And really everybody else, it's been pretty much been resolved, and everybody knows what's what there, with Isaiah Lee, Jairell Brock both left the program. I don't think you'll probably see Deshaun Hanika, the tight end, again, and really you don't need to. That they've got great depth there, and they're certainly not hurting with Hanika being out. So I think they've certainly moved on, and you're into the season now, and you know what you're going to have. And the one guy that you're probably going to get back at one point is Remsburg. So he's practicing, and you prepare accordingly.
On to these recruiting battles. We've only got a few minutes left, so we'll make it quick. But I've got a list of guys here that both schools have at least appeared to be recruiting hard, not necessarily offered all of them. Have Iowa State and Iowa offered all of them, but the list is in the 2025 and the 2026 classes, and it's only a few players. So I'm just going to read it off, and I'll have you tell me if any of these guys, if Iowa State is the clear leader to you for them at this point in their recruitment. Thomas Meyer, Zay Robinson, Jack Limbaugh, Alex Mansky, Malachi Curvey, Rashawn Ross, and Jaden McGregory.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good list there. Malachi Curvey, I think he's one. A lot of, I think, writers outside of Ames would think that it's not necessarily a given that he goes to Iowa State, but I still think that the Cyclones are in great shape with him. I think that he'll end up being a part of this class. You mentioned Zay Robinson.
Yep.
He's another one. I know the way the offense structured there at Iowa State, he and Nate Shieldhouse were very close before Nate even got the OC's job. And The Cyclones in great shape there. It's a shame that he suffered the shoulder injury that he did, but I think maybe that closes things in for him a little more to where he focuses on what he's got right now for offers, because he's really not going to have much tape probably until next camp season, and it makes you wonder if he's already wrapped things up and committed by then. So that narrows his focus down. You said Thomas Meyer. I think with him, it's a matter of what position he wants to play on the field. I just talked to him. I believe it was right before Clear Lake's season opener. He still hadn't really wanted to hint at what he wants to play at the next level. I think if he plays defense, the Cyclones have a great shot. They've offered him there. He's gotten a lot of work with Eli Rashid, the position coach there. If he wants to play offense, gosh, and be a tight end, it's hard to beat Iowa for him and what the Hawks have done with that position. So a matter of two positions there. Remind me the other three you had mentioned first. You said Ross from the 2026 from Fort Dodge.
Yep.
Is he a wrestler at the next level? I mean, it's tough to predict with him. Iowa State offered him a while back at on the football field, and I think if he wants to play there, certainly would be a factor. But I don't believe that the coaches saw him over the summer either. I don't think he camped in Ames for them to get a better look at him. So it's going to be one of those things. They can't initiate contact yet with 26s either. So it's going to take him probably come on and go into a game, and we'll maybe get a better feel for how that goes. Jade McGregory, was he another one from West Des Moines Valley? I think the Cyclones are in good shape there, and really I think recruiting him maybe more so on the defensive side of the ball, and gosh, he would look great at 6'2", playing safety in Ames, but I think still a lot to be decided with him, and really if Valley can get the quarterback situation figured out, gosh, he might look pretty good as a wide receiver too on tape coming into this offseason. I think one more guy too you had mentioned. Was it Mansky?
Mansky and Limbaugh.
Mansky and Limbaugh, the two Algona kids. Limbaugh's the one that has the offer there. Mansky, I think, was probably this close to getting an offer. I think you were at Iowa State's camp that day as well, Eliot. He was close. He started out the first half of the camp. I think maybe I told you or someone else that I think he's going to get an offer based on what we saw in the testing phases and kind of some of that stuff, and maybe when they got out into the one-on-ones and some of the positional drills, they maybe wanted to see a little bit more out of him. And there's certainly lighting him up with edits right now. You see him tweet some of these things out. But Iowa State's very high on a quarterback out of St. Louis right now, I think, and he's been up on an unofficial visit. So I think they're going to get maybe a little more clear. They can be picky there. I think they're waiting to maybe get a little more clarity if they can get the St. Louis kid up for another game day visit, kind of where they're at there before maybe they get too serious on Mansky. But Limbaugh certainly is a take, and on the defensive side of the ball, and one they'd love to have and plug in at that maybe that rush end position, the Leo defensive end on that side.
Now, I'll share my quick thoughts and we'll get you out of here because I know you got to get going. But to me, when I look at this list, there's a few names that stick out right away. It's Curvey, obviously. I think Iowa State's the favorite. Obviously, Iowa hasn't offered. I don't know that they will because the conversation was surrounded around camp for him. And then Jaden McGregory, who hasn't received the offer from Iowa, is continuing to build that relationship. I tagged you in the tweet. He was wearing Iowa State gloves in that for that opening game against forgive me. It was Southeast Polk this season. Yep. So, and of course, his recruitment is very, very young at this point, so to speak. Sure. Zay Robinson, definitely one to watch for the Cyclones, Jack Limbaugh as well. And I got to say, I definitely lean Iowa for Thomas Meyer. There's still a whole lot of time to go. He will be in Ames this weekend. So definitely a name to watch as the junior season progresses.
A lot of those guys we've talked about here are all going to be there. In fact, I I think that 100% of those 6 that we talked about are all going to be there this weekend. So a little close Friday, I'll have the full breakdown on everyone I've confirmed for Saturday. It's going to be a long list, and I think the 6 we talked about are all going to be on campus on Saturday.
I definitely want to see that list once you've got it together, Bill. That's for sure. We'll get that in the description too for, I assume, our premium subscribers are
Sure.
going to get the access to that. So we'll have that there. So before we get you out of here, make sure that you go follow Bill on Twitter. It is William Seals there, at William Seals rather on Twitter, and subscribe wherever you're listening to the podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Play, etc. If you want to get premium content from us, you can do that at iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. Become a premium subscriber today. And lastly, we appreciate you tuning in to this episode of HawkCast to preview that CyHawk game this weekend. And for now, we'll see you next time.